So I'll tell a bit about who we are and go from there. Um, so some of you might know we've been collaborating now for nearly 12 years. We met in 2010, and pretty much from a few days after we've met, we started working together, and our practice kind of developed from that first first moment that we met and started talking, and the dialogue kind of sprung from that moment and it's continued up to this day. We work across various mediums. We work with moving image, photography, performance, installation, and correspondence art. And we use ourselves and our life together as the material of our work, to explore themes of perception, subjective experience, and the nature of reality. And what we're really interested in is this phenomenology of being alive, the sort of experience and mystery and strangeness of being a living, breathing, conscious human creature in the world existing. Our work is often set in the British countryside, and particularly landscapes. And we use the term landscape imaginary to describe the space where our work exists. And landscape imaginary refers to the zone where inner and outer experiences of place exist as one. It's our psychological experience of the landscape, but also the dream of the landscape itself. And it's the meeting point between the personal and that which lays beyond our grasp.
So so we're going to focus on talking a bit about our correspondence works today. We use this so the correspondence works really refers to these projects that we make that are exist as a kind of direct exchange between us and an audience, an individual audience member. So it's the works that kind of could be mail art, but they're also kind of digital text works, messages, voicemails, sometimes Zoom performances. And it's really about these kind of using these communication tools to kind of create this direct experience from us to the viewer. And we've always been interested in this, in the sort of subjective experience of reality, and this sort of idea that as human beings, we're all having a kind of unique personal experience of reality that differs from everybody else's. We're all coming at it from our own perspectives, with our own psychology, our own conditions, our own physicality, that none of us are experiencing reality in identical, exactly the same ways. And this is something that really fascinates us, and something that we've been exploring a lot in various ways over the years. And the correspondence works for us feel like a very interesting way to explore this, because they work in this direct line from people receiving a single thing personalized to them. So what we create with these is something that exists as an artifact that comes from our own subjective experience of the world in some way, but then that is offered to the viewer as a catalyst for their own individual subjective experience. And, you know, our hope is that through that process, one can become aware of those kind of nuances of how we're experiencing reality and creating our reality as we go through life.
So this is our first correspondence work, and this was made in 2018. And 2018 was a very important year for us. It was a kind of turning point moment in our practice. For the first 10 years that we worked together, our focus was on moving image. We made a lot of feature films and short films and expanded cinema performances, and we were really driven by this desire to explore the possibilities of moving image, and really understanding how the language of moving image worked, and pushing at the limits of what cinema and moving image could be with the tools that we had available to us. And what happened in that year was that we moved in front of the camera and we entered the picture in a sense, and in a way we became the subject and material of our work, and our daily life became a subject and material of our work. And this opened a lot of possibilities for us. Perhaps the most important one is that the boundaries that were still there between our lives and our work were dissipated with this step. And we suddenly began considering how everything in our life could be a part of our work and a part of our art. And so that made it possible for us to begin expanding our practice onto other art forms. And we started working with drawings, printmaking, photography, performance. And in a way, we were still we still work with moving image and very much informed by the language, and we carried that language into the new mediums that we worked with, but with a new perspective and a new openness.
So this project, the auto replies, these were texts that we wrote that were kind of like out of office replies that people would receive if they messaged us on Facebook. So every time someone messaged us on Facebook, they'd get one of these texts automatically in response, and we would change them every time that someone messaged us, so everyone would get a different one. And in those days we weren't getting a huge amount of messages, so I think we had about 30 that we made over a sort of period of time. I'm not sure how well you can see it. Maybe I'll read one out just in case you can't see them very well. So, Daniel and Clara are away right now. They will get back to you soon. In the meantime, please picture them sat in the garden of a country cottage watching fox cubs playing on the lawn. In the distance, a choir rehearses and something awakens in the wood. So kind of this move from working with moving image to working with text and other mediums, we kind of carried with us something from what we'd been exploring in the moving image. And in some ways, we were thinking at this point of these almost as moving image works, and this idea that we could somehow project a scene into the mind of the reader and that it would somehow play out like a motion picture. It was also in this period that landscape kind of came to the fore as the kind of interest and subject of the work. So we became present in the work, and the landscape became kind of something that we really realized we really wanted to focus on. And we were living in Portugal at the time. We'd been in Portugal for about 6 years, and we'd already decided we wanted to kind of get to the British countryside and make work here, but we hadn't been able to make that move. And it was a year later still till we actually managed to move here. So in these words, we were almost kind of creating a bit of a fantasy about the British landscape, a kind of imagined version, and sort of imaginatively placing ourselves there. But because these were imagined spaces, the imagination kind of has a life of its own. And often in these auto-reply texts, there's always this kind of tension that seems to kind of creep in, this feeling of something kind of eerie or dangerous just out of sight, living within the landscape. So they kind of have this tension that kind of carries through them.
So in 2019, then about a year later, we finally managed to move to the UK. And like we said, we had this attraction to the landscape here, to the British countryside, and we really wanted to make work that was about us exploring and having these experiences in the British countryside. But now that we were here, we were kind of not really, we didn't have roots in the place. We'd been away for so long, we didn't know anyone, and we didn't really know where exactly we wanted to be. We didn't have a fixed place, so we felt kind of adrift, and was searching. Really, also not just in the sense of where we were physically, but also I think in creatively trying to understand where we belonged, where our work belonged creatively and in the wider art world now that we were in a different environment. So all of these things were kind of like very much things we were dealing with in those first few months that we were in the UK. And in a way to deal with this, we created this series of letters, which are the blue letters, which you can see here. And we sent these out during the first few months that we had just moved to the UK. So each letter is an inkjet print of an empty landscape with the handwritten phrase, Daniel and Clara, last seen here. And these were almost like SOS messages that were sent out to the void. We were sending these out to strangers. In a way, they were all people that were kind of a part, could be said to be a part of the art worlds that we knew about, but we hadn't met personally, but we felt we'd like to have some connection with. So we would just send these out. And in a way, we were kind of throwing them into our narrative and creating this mystery of Daniel and Clara and who is Daniel and Clara, and projecting ourselves into their imagination. But the letters are really playing this strange dynamic of absence and presence, where we are announcing our presence, but we are absent. And I think this also relates to time. We were thinking a lot about how time exists in the work, because obviously we were present in these places when we took these pictures, but by the time that people received the letters, we were no longer there. So the letters are kind of just playing with these ideas of presence and absence, and also a theme that I think is continuing to run in our work, which is about a kind of affirmation of our existence. The work is very much about us being present and navigating this strange reality of being alive. And in a way, by making the work, we confirm to ourselves and to the world that we are here, we are present, and we are a part of this reality.
So each letter that we make is printed on a different color paper, and we're kind of interested in colors and the different sort of symbolic and cultural and art historical associations that come with colors. Blue is a kind of color that often is associated with spirituality and sort of a color of transcendence. Obviously in Christian art, it's quite often used for the heavens and for the Virgin Mary's shroud. And for our next letter, we printed it on this yellow paper. And we were thinking a lot with this sort of association of this type of yellow with kind of ideas around sickness and fevers and illness. And I think this was because these letters were created through that first 6 months of the pandemic. You know, in those first few months, we were kind of back in the UK. We were in between houses staying with family, and we'd come to stay with family in a place called Mersey Island, which is an island on the Essex coast. And we were supposed to only be here for a couple of weeks, but because of lockdown, we ended up staying much longer. And in fact, we're actually still on Mersey Island now, 2 years later. So this short kind of stay, you know, was sort of thrown into something more permanent because of the pandemic. And through these letters, it's really about us kind of navigating the experience of suddenly being confined in a single place and being on an island, which somehow psychologically emphasized that sense of separation and being cut off. So there's a narrative that unfolds through these letters that really deals with grappling with the experience of being in the pandemic, being in this new place and exploring this wonderful, beautiful place that we've ended up in. But there's a kind of anxiety and tension that exists in these as well. And then the first letter starts, you know, sort of not too long after the first lockdown. And the last letter was sent the day before we left the island for the first time in that 6-month period. So as they unfold, there's this strange sort of, they weren't planned, you know, we're just very much responding. Each letter takes its own journey. But there's this sort of disintegration that happens of, or this disorientation of language and experience, and this feeling of losing control, actually, I think is one of the things that runs through them. These are available to read. We can give you a link where you can read these if anyone would like to read them afterwards. And even here you can see like this sort of this disorientation and this feeling of things falling apart happens with the last letter is sort of screwed up. I think there's one where we don't use any punctuation. It's like even the language starts to kind of break down as well.
And also during this time of the first lockdown, we'd actually been planning to go to Cornwall to make a project about the standing stones there. But of course this was cancelled and we weren't able to go. But we had already spent quite a lot of time researching and preparing for this project. So we felt like the journey had already begun in a way. And instead of letting reality kind of dictate our plans and get in our way, we decided to take instead an imagined journey to Cornwall. So we pitched a tent in our garden and we created some works about this imagined journey. We made a video, we did drawings and a Zoom performance, and we also wrote a diary of what happened on this journey. And the diary kind of connects to the letters in a way because it talks about an experience of place and it merges inner and outer experience in similar ways that we do in the letters. And even though we didn't actually take the journey, it feels very real to us because of the intense engagement that we had with the images and the story as we were creating them, and it feels like a real journey. And also the landscape kind of took a life of its own in our imagination, and we haven't really been to Cornwall, so the landscape of Cornwall is really built up from images and stories that we encountered through our research. You know, these are things that are part of a kind of cultural landscape, but also exploring the landscape through Google Maps and exploring where we would have gone if we had actually been there. We also like the narrative form of the diary, and it relates to the correspondence works in that sense, the way that it kind of unfolds over time, and how, like the letters, it sort of draws attention to the subjectivity of reality. Yeah, so we'll stop sharing because these you can see here is the diary and the drawings as they were originally made, but we also did a print edition of it.
Yeah, so they kind of ended up in these little booklets. So it's the same diary, but we kind of made an edition. We kind of like making, you know, this is different sort of in some ways to the letterworks, but these are things that are kind of available for people. And we just sort of like this idea of almost like they kind of look based a bit on field guides and this sort of aesthetic that you get with sort of old maps and that kind of thing, which we find quite attractive. And there's a certain imaginative kind of dimension to that when you get kind of maps from sort of like you know, the 30s and 40s and guidebooks from that period. There's a distance sort of somehow to them that we find kind of really evocative, and you kind of begin to kind of imagine a different reality, a different time, and a different way of experiencing landscapes and place at a different time, which is obviously different to how we experience things now with the sort of different technological mediated experience that we have. So yeah, we kind of took great pleasure in making these as sort of little guidebooks as well. Cool. Yes. So coming out of the pandemic, when the restrictions were kind of lifted and we started going further afield, this was really the kind of catalyst for making the red letters. And, you know, they grew out of that feeling of the anxiety of kind of going further afield again, traveling to different places, encountering people, and this almost like hyper awareness of the senses that seemed to happen when we were kind of traveling, this sort of different awareness and this anxiety that we realized that we had at first when we were kind of traveling by buses and trains and heading off to places, you know, sort of further afield. And it was amazing to us how this heightened awareness was sort of impacting our imagination and our state of mind. So the red letters kind of really grew out of this. And as you know, because you've all been receiving them, they like the other works, they kind of blend the inner and outer experience. They're very much about the way that landscape and weather kind of seep into the psyche and the imagination and really affect our experience of being in the world. So these were printed on red paper, and we were really thinking at the beginning about this idea of the state of emergency that we've been living through, and this sort of anxiety that has come out of that, not just from the pandemic, but also the various other things that have been happening in the world at the moment, and this feeling of slight overwhelm that we've all been having. And we also were thinking about really this idea of a state of emergency and crisis, and even crisis of perception that could be kind of said to be happening to do with the way that technology is affecting our perception and us navigating that, not necessarily thinking of it as good or bad, but just realizing that it is having an impact on how we exist as being in the world today. So yeah, I think that also sort of informs like how the desire to make physical objects, to make letters, and that, you know, to work with this the physical photograph as well. So the red is a color that we've often returned to throughout our work. There's always traces of like red used kind of very decisively at key moments in our work. There was a feature film that we made, finished in 2019, which is about a journey around the UK, and it focuses a lot on Avebury as a sort of central motif. But we use these red color fields frequently in the film. And one of the things that we really sort of found exciting when we started working with these color fields is the physical effect they were having on us as we watch. When you're in a dark room watching these projected, it's like you can feel your muscles in your face. You know, you become super aware of the way that the eye is working, and it can have a physical effect on your body as well. And even like we found that our ears were, you know, we were kind of almost hearing the sound. It was having such a kind of physical effect on us. So we were really interested in that idea of the physicality of red. And I don't know how you've experienced reading the text on the red paper, but we have it's maybe a slightly more subtle version of that, but it still can happen, the sort of reading that black text on the red paper as kind of being quite a difficult thing for our eyes to sort of adjust to. So that's something that we just find quite interesting about bringing this art into becoming a physical experience. So yeah, this one thing we wanted to show you actually as you're here is the camera that we've been taking the red letter photographs on. This is a camera that was given to us from a relative's house clearance. It's a Goldie camera. It's like a bit like a box brownie. That was, I think it's about 80 years old.
I think it's a French model, and it was kind of distributed in the UK during the Second World War, but very, very briefly. So there's not many of them about.
And we had no idea whether it was going to work at first. So we kind of got some, it takes this large 120 film. Probably can't see the negatives that well, but yeah. So the photographs that are printed on the top of the letters are just ever so slightly bigger than the actual negative itself. And you know, it's got viewfinders on the, can you see that? Yeah, on the top. You know, so it's really like not that precise. But one thing that we really like about it is the way that around the edge of the images on the photographs is you get that, you've probably seen it. There's like there's a distortion. Probably can't really see it on there very well, but on your red letters, you'll see it's got this kind of circular distortion around the edge, which there's just something about the way that it's clear and precise and then distorts that we just find kind of quite attractive and appealing. And we have them chemically printed, so they're printed with the sort of C-type prints. So yeah, we wanted to just show you that, the tool that's been used to make them.
Yeah.
Just go back to this.
Okay, and just to end, we wanted to also mention this other project that we're working on and runs parallel to the red letters. It's not a correspondence work, but it connects to, in many ways, to the things we've been talking about. And so it's from here to the end. It's a series of Polaroid diptychs, and there'll be 100 of them. And we've made about 20 so far. And each picture is composed of 2 Polaroid photographs that we take of each other in a specific place that we go and visit. And many of the places that are in the photographs are also places that we talk about in the red letters. And often when we visit a place, we're working on the 2 things at the same time. So the experiences are kind of, again, multiplied into these 2 different projects. And this is something that we do a lot. There's a big overlap between our projects, and we often work on several projects at the same time. And in a way, we kind of see our practice as just this one big project, which is the exploration of Daniel and Clara in the world, these 2 humans existing in the world.